Hello and welcome back to Saxon Math. This is lesson 76, comparing fractions by converting to decimal form. We've compared fractions by drawing pictures of fractions and writing fractions with common denominators. Another way to compare fractions is to convert the fractions to decimal form. Let's look at an example. So compare these fractions. First, convert each fraction to decimal form. So remember, if you have something that's compatible with 100, for example, you can see that it'll be easy to make a fraction out of it. I know that 5 times 20 is 100, so that means 3 times 20 will be 60. So I know that 3/5 is the same as 6/10 or 60/100. For 5/8, I have to actually do 5 divided by 8 because 8 is not compatible with 100. So I just need to plug in a couple zeros there. Remember, the decimal goes straight up in the answer. So 5 divided by 8 is 0. 50 divided by 8, the closest to that would be approximately 5. 8 times 5 would be 40. 8 times 6 would be 48. So I'm going to go 8 times 6 for 48. Subtract that. This would be 2 because this would be when borrow from there. We'd have to bring this down. 20 divided by 8 would be 2. Closest we could get to that would be 16. Subtract that. This would be 4. We'd have to add another 0 and bring that one down. And once I do that, I see 40 divided by 8 would be 5. And 5 times 8 is 40. This is where we'd be left with. So that means 5/8 is the same as 625 thousandths. So because of that, I now compare these two, and I look at this 0 and this 0. They're both the same. I look at this 6 and this 6, and they're equal to each other. Well, this one does not have a 2. This one does have a 2. So this would be technically having nothing there. That would be like this. If we had 600 thousandths, this would be 625 thousandths. Therefore, I can see that 625 thousandths is going to be greater than 600 thousandths, or 600 thousandths is less than 625 thousandths. That means that 3/5 is less than 5/8. So that's how you would look at that. Example 2, comparing 3/4 and 7/10. Most of us already know what 3/4 is as a fraction, or from a fraction to a decimal. We know that it's 75 hundredths. If we didn't know that, we could take 3/4 and realize that we could multiply 4 times 25 to get to 100 and take 3 times 25 to get to 75. So 75 hundredths as a decimal, we know it looks like that. So now you have to compare this one. It's 75 hundredths and 7/10. 7/10 is also the same as 70 hundredths. So you have to keep in mind that just because this is 7/10 doesn't make this necessarily immediately smaller than 75 hundredths, but you have to recognize that, well, yeah, this is 7 with a 0 behind it. This is 7 with a 5 behind it. 75 hundredths is greater than 70 hundredths. So that means 3/4 is greater than 7/10. So once you've converted the fraction into the decimal, you can compare those much easier. All right, let's try these. So if you have a 3/20 and 1/8, for letter A, I'm going to convert 3/20 because I'm gonna do it this way quicker, because I know that 20 times 5 equals 100, and this times 5 equals 15. So that means 3/20 is the same as 15 hundredths, and 1/8 I have to actually do that math. I have to do 1 divided by 8. So I'm going to add a couple zeros in there just for good measure. And I have the decimal straight up in the answer. 1 divided by 8 would be 0. 10 divided by 8 would be 1. Subtract that. This would be 2. Bring down this 0. 20 divided by 8 would be 2. 16 taken away from there would be 4. Bring this down. This would be 0. 40 divided by 8 would be 5. This times that would be 40. Subtract it. There'd be nothing left over. So we have the two things we're comparing is 15 hundredths and 125 thousandths. Now, if I compare these, I have to look at each place value. So I'm going to look at the first place value that I've got is the 0. So the 0 actually would be the same in this one as it is in this one. The 1/10ths place, it has a 1 in both of them. The hundredths place has a 5 here and a 2 there. So that's as far as I need to go. I know that this 5 is greater than this 2. I don't need to look any further. I could go further if I wanted to, this 0 and this 5, but I recognize right off the bat here, this 5 is greater than this 2. That means that 15 hundredths or 3/20ths is greater than 1/8 or 1/8. All right, letter B. 3/8 and 2/5. So for 3/8, I need to do 3 divided by 8. And I'm going to add some zeros in here. And I'm going to put the decimal straight up in the answer. 3 divided by 8 is 0. 30 divided by 8 would be not 4 because that would be 32. So I would go to 3, which gets me to 24. Subtract that. This would be 6. Bring this down. This would be 60 divided by 8 would be 7 because the closest that would be is 56. This would be 4. I'd have to bring that 0 down. 40 divided by 8 would be 5. 5 times 8 is 40. Subtract that. There's nothing left over. That means 3/8 is the same as 375 thousandths. So I'm going to compare that to what 2/5 is. If I convert 2/5 into a decimal, I'm just going to do it this way. I see that 5 is easily relatable to 100 by multiplying by 20. And this would be multiplied by 20. That means this is the decimal I'm looking at here. So I'm going to compare that to 40 hundredths. And I'm actually just going to add another 0 on there so that it's got the same number. I have 375 thousandths. Now I have 400 thousandths. And when I compare those two, I can see that this 375 is going to be less than this 400 thousandths. That means that 3/8 is less than 2/5. All right, letter C. If I have 15 25ths, just to start this off, I see that that one is going to be equal to 100 pretty easily. This one would be times 4. That means I have to multiply this times 4. 10 times 4 is 40. 20 is what the 5 times 4 is, and that would make 60. So that means that this is the same as 60 hundredths. And then 3/5, let me do the same thing to that. I know that it's going to be compatible with 100, so times 20. This would be times 20, so that would be 60 in this case. So that means 3/5 is the same as 60 hundredths. So if I was to compare these, I can see that this is equal. 15 25ths is the same as 3/5 because 60 hundredths and 60 hundredths are equal to each other. So that is my final answer. If I was to recognize that both these are divisible by 5, 15 divided by 5 is 3, 25 divided by 5 is 5. All right, so excellent work there. That's 6/10 or 60 hundredths equals 6/10 or 60 hundredths. These would still be equal too if I wrote it like that. All right, letter D, 7/10 and 4/5. So for letter D, 7/10 is already in decimal format. 4/5, that's compatible with 100 again. So I'm going to put a fraction with 100. Recognize that 5 times 20 equals 100. 4 times 20 equals 80. So that means this decimal is the same as 80 hundredths or 8 tenths. So when comparing that decimal, I know that this is going to be less than this because 7 tenths is less than 8 tenths. That means 7 tenths is less than 4 fifths. All right, letter E. See if we can fit letter E down here. 2 fifths. I would see that that's also compatible with 100 because I'm going to multiply this one times 20, this one times 20. So this would be the same as 40 over 100, which is the same as 4 tenths or 40 hundredths. And then I've got the 5 tenths. So let's just write it out in that order. 2 fifths is the same as 4 tenths. And the other one was already written in decimal format. So 5 tenths. So you can see 4 tenths is going to be less than 5 tenths. That means 2 fifths is less than 5 tenths. All right, letter F. All right, let me put that in orange right here. So for letter F, if I have 3/8, it looks like I need to divide that. 3 divided by 8. There's nothing I can do except this, so I have to add that, extend this out. Decimal comes straight up in the answer. 3 divided by 8 would be 0. 30 divided by 8, closest thing would be 3, which would get me to 24. Subtract that, it would be 6. Bring this 0 down. 60 divided by 8 would be 7, which would get me to 56. This would be 4. Bring this 0 down. This would be 40 divided by 8, which would be 5. 5 times 8 is 40. There's nothing left over. This is my decimal for 3/8. So now if I'm comparing those, if I have the decimal for 3/8 compared to the decimal that was already given, 325 thousandths, now I just look at those two decimals and I see that the 0.03372. Okay, this 7 is greater than this 2. Therefore, 375 thousandths is greater than 325 thousandths, which is saying the same as 3/8 is greater than 325 thousandths. All right. Excellent work. That's all there is for today. Hope you enjoyed it. And remember, when doing your math, your written practice, you need to do 1 through 30 in order to understand any of the previous lessons. It's the way Saxon math works. If you skip any, or you do 1 through 15, or you only do 16 through 30, or you do evens, or you do odds, you are not getting the practice required to understand what's going on in math. That's how this system works. So keep up the good work, and we'll see you next time.